Welcome everyone to Webinar Wednesday. I'm Pebbles Turbyville. I'm the CEO for Horses and Humans Research Foundation, and we welcome all of you and hope that you will go ahead and put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're from and what you're up to. And we have a special guest tonight, Chris Irwin, but I'm going to turn it over to Marcy and Kathy, who are on the Equine Wellbeing Committee, so that they can handle all the logistics and the housekeeping piece, as well as introduce Chris for tonight.
Hi, I'm Kathy Langerin, and I am happy to introduce Chris Irwin tonight. And I want to keep this as short as possible because I'd rather listen to Chris, but I've had the pleasure of working with Chris for quite a few years on and off, and been able to work with him in his Irwin Insights program. And I'm always referring people to his Mind Your Horse program and his wonderful YouTubes. I've read his books and been influenced by his teaching just in many wonderful ways. And I've worked with Chris with veterans. I've worked with Chris with different youth groups, and he's always one to volunteer and help. I have a couple of things from the website, which I just wanted to give an overview. He's a best-selling author and trainer of trainers. FEA recognizes Chris as a world leader in equestrian sport due to outstanding international reputation as a trainer and coach. Chris's insights are taught in universities and colleges throughout North America and Europe, and he's a world leader in empathic horsemanship. I've found all that to be true and I would recommend him highly to anybody who gets a chance to listen to him. Chris puts in 200%, and he's learned so much from the horses. And when he talks to you, when he talks to humans, he really helps you understand what the horses know, understand, and want to share. So we'll turn it over to Chris, and I know Marcy wants to talk a little bit about our chat room.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. So please remember to mute yourselves. And Chris welcomes all your questions, and he's asked that you put them in the chat. I will do my best to monitor that, and he does want to answer them as he goes along. So if something timely comes up for you, put it in the chat, and I'll try to find a good time to ask Chris your question. So thank you. Here's Chris.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Catherine, for that kind and generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm seeing a few familiar names and faces. That's always nice. And I am ready to dig into this whenever anyone has a first question. No first question? Shall I just start riffing?
Yes.
Well, when I'm first talking about horses with people, whether they're novice horse people or Olympians and everyone in between, I like to stay grounded in the fact that horses, I use the term frame of body as frame of mind. We've seen a lot of talk recently about horses and regulating. People regulating themselves and horses regulating themselves. And this is, in my opinion, touching on that concept of the frame of body is the frame of mind. I have seen so often, countless times, that human beings can get very caught up in debating theory about what's right or wrong, or what's good or bad, or what's better. And the reason I titled my first book, Horses Don't Lie, is because that big, beautiful creature standing right next to you, telling you exactly how it feels moment to moment through its body language. We have terms that we're hearing all the time these days, like biomechanics. Horses' body language, much of it is their biomechanics, but it's everything from biomechanics to facial expressions to, we talk about a hard eye, soft eye. So there's a lot more acknowledgement and recognition these days for the biomechanics of a horse and how those biomechanics can affect it. A horse who's, I'll just dive right into what I struggle with a lot. We've all heard that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, let's take physiotherapeutic riding, for instance, is where Catherine and I first met each other at I believe it was the Path World Conference about 4 or 5, 6 years ago, wasn't it, Catherine?
Yeah, at least that long.
And something that was a bit disruptive at that conference was to stand up in front of 400 members from therapeutic riding centers around the world and say, with all due respect, look at your own program, the program for that conference. And I remember these numbers. It was about a 42-page program for the conference. And within those 42 pages, I identified 17 photographs of horses stressed out. Their body language, they were just still photographs, but those photographs revealed horses under stress during equine-assisted services. So I said, we're looking at an issue here of heal or heal thyself. We all want to do right by these horses and we want to work with horses in service to people. However, look at these horses. And for instance, the number one issue that I was seeing over and over again, and this is kind of where the road to hell is paved with good intentions, horses being worked with in physiotherapeutic programs, but the horses have inverted, hollowed backs. So if a horse is packing around a human being and the horse has that hollowed back, that is causing stress in the body of the horse. That is causing stress in the mind of the horse. And unfortunately, it pretty much negates any physiotherapeutic effect for the person. And unfortunately, people don't like hearing that, but it's true. And what gets real interesting is how often it can be the most subtle body gestures and biomechanics of the human that are affecting the horse. And it can be happening so subtly that the people are totally unaware of it. So again, with this theme, for instance, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I've worked in a lot of therapy centers, physical therapy, mental therapy, equine assisted this and equine assisted that. And I get called in they ask me to help them with behavior issues with the horses. And one of the most common issues is horses in therapeutic programs who are angry and biting at the leader. And if we're going to get real and we're going to talk about that, what a sad irony is that the intention is to be providing well-being services to people through horses, and we want to address the well-being of horses, but in the practice, it comes down to this issue that we know about in the human realm of the bedside manner of the practitioners. We're all familiar with that cliche of the brilliant surgeon. The brilliant surgeon knows the science, but sometimes the patient can be very uncomfortable about the lack of empathy and sympathy in terms of bedside manner of the surgeon. There is a direct correlation there in what's happening with horses. So for instance, I can go into these places and show the leader, if they just readjust how they're using their body, as they become more aware of what they're doing with their legs, more aware of where they're aiming their core, silly as this sounds, more aware of where they're positioning their belly button. Some of you have seen this work. I know Marcy's seen it. Catherine's seen it many times. here's a really strong statement. If you're working with horses and you're not conscious of where your belly button's pointing every single moment, then you're just throwing energy around, just throwing it around. And it is why so many horses in therapeutic programs are shutting down or getting irritated. And getting grumpy. It's because the people handling them, despite good intentions, the biomechanics coming out of the human body send signals into the horse's body. The horse's biomechanics respond to those signals. And then all through the fascia of the horse and the physiology of the horse, it starts producing stress. So just how a human being puts a halter on a horse may or may not be causing the horse to start stressing out, producing adrenaline. How we lead horses. I can't, for the life of me, get over, everyone listening to this has heard the biomechanical truth that horses ideally will move through their body driving from their hind end, and the energy comes from back to front out the front end. But I see everyone from Olympians to well-meaning healers working in therapeutic settings pulling on halters, pulling on bridles. So despite our best intentions, we all need to become a lot more aware of what this is doing, our biomechanics. When you take our biomechanics and you blend it into the horse's biomechanics, now it shifts into this term biodynamics. And our biodynamic effect is stressing horses out. Just last week, I was listening to a podcast. It wasn't for the equine assisted world. It was for the horsemanship world in general. And there was a trainer being interviewed on this podcast about more enlightened horse training. She's someone who says she used to be very much the old school command and control. She grew up as a jumper and she was tough on horses and blah, blah, blah. And now she's seen the light and she knows better. And I listened to her talk for an hour and there was zero acknowledgement whatsoever of the biomechanics of the human being affecting the horse. She was simplifying it down to don't be mean and beat them up. You know, it was as simple as instead of abusing horses, we should all take up clicker training. And I'm not against clicker training, but clicker training without being aware of what your body's doing while you're clicker training, that isn't helping. So that's where my premise comes from. And, you know, as Catherine has said, and some of you may recognize, it's profoundly true. Horses who bite, horses who won't let you pick up the feet, horses who are hard to catch and halter and bridle, horses who can't stand still. All of these, 9 times out of 10, a profound shift can happen in the horse with very subtle adjustments in the human's body language. So that's what I like to bring to the table. And it's not to start out on a heavy note, but despite good intentions, there's an art and a science to working with horses, and the science requires that we become much more aware of how we're aligning our bodies to their bodies. And when we get into the practical of that, you hear energy talked about a lot. As healers, in the realm of healing, energy can be as passive and non-invasive as Reiki, or it can be as deep and invasive as Rolfing, and everything in between. And we run that spectrum with horses. Yes, they are so affected by our energies. You can be moving a horse without any physical connection. For instance, Liberty work in the round pen, and you're 25 feet away from the horse. But as I'm looking into the camera of my laptop here, to you, the audience, this is my right shoulder pushing forward towards you. This is my left shoulder pulling away from you. This is my center. You can't see my belly button, but this is my center turning to my right, probably your left. This is my center turning to your left. This is me drawing away from you. This is me pushing into you. So even just sitting in this chair, I'll ask you to watch, and I'll tell you in a moment, I'm about to drop a little lower on my right side. Here it goes. Just that. Now, these are subtle little movements. And if I tell you to watch when this shoulder moves forward, it's about to happen. If you're watching for it, there, you see it. If I don't ask people to watch for it, they see it, but it doesn't consciously register with any meaning. And yet our horses are seeing all of this. So my right shoulder I'm coming to put a halter on you. And as I do, my right shoulder pushes into you while I'm haltering you. Well, pushing to a horse tells it to move away. So we go to put a halter on, and we've literally pushed the head away. Now, if we push the head away, then the human instinct is to follow it. Well, now we're just continuing to push it. And as that horse is turning its head away, thinking we're telling it to, or I wouldn't even say thinking we're telling it to, let me back all these statements up and say the physics just is what it is. When the wind is blowing from the north, the flag is going to point south. And we don't have to debate whether it's good wind or bad wind or enlightened wind or old school wind. It's energy blowing, and the flag is at the effect of it. So a human being just coming in to put on a halter or a bridle, more often than not, is pushing energy is sent to the head. And pushing energy is hurting. It's move away. So the head moves away. And when the head moves away, the human instinct is to go after it, thinking we're following it, but we're not. We're pushing it even more. And then we all see it. Well, then the person gets frustrated and pulls the head back. Everyone's seen this. It happens every day. Now, keeping all that in mind, when energy flows through a horse's body from back to front, well, let me back that up some more. We've all seen a horse go to lay down. And when a horse goes to lay down, not always, but a lot of the times it'll circle around a little bit first, just like your dog will. And when you watch their body doing that, it is not their head moving back and forth, left and right. Their neck and head stays pretty centered in the body, and it's the body moving. So we have to get into a real distinction here. I'm going to turn away from the camera for a moment. Now, this is me turning back to the lens of the camera with my head, not my body. This is a nose first or a head first turn. Now I'm going to keep my neck and head centered in the middle of my body and bring my head back to the camera by moving my body. When horses move through their bodies with their neck and head still in the center of their chest, the body's moving, not the neck and head, that tends to cause them to stretch and become more supple and become more relaxed, and they lay down. Now, we've also seen a horse could be perfectly quiet out in the paddock eating grass with its nose down on the ground, and then there's a disturbance somewhere. And the first part of the body to move is not the legs. It's not in the body, it's the nose. It's the head that comes up first and turns out of the center of the chest. Now, what I've found over the years, it's quite simple. Back to front movements where the nose moves last is soothing to a horse. Front to back movements where the nose moves first is stressful to the horse. And every horse does both every day of its life. There are times in as close as it can be to a natural environment where it doesn't feel threatened or stressed with its environment. So it's moving around with its body, moving its nose and head last, but then something triggers it in the environment and it moves its nose first. So the energy of movement in horses sometimes is coming from back to front, sometimes it's coming from front to back. And it's a bit of an oversimplification, but back to front feels good and front to back feels bad. You take that scenario back to putting on a halter. Why so many horses are grumpy? is because people move around their neck and head with pushing energy coming out of our body, causing the neck and head to move. So if I go to halter you as a horse, and as I'm coming in, my torso, my chest, even my hands reaching towards your head, all of those signals say, move your head. And then we pull it back. We moved it again. And this back and forth with the head fills them with stress. Now that's just one example. It also comes into play when we're leading, lunging, riding horses. A huge, huge distinction here. Let's talk about reins for a moment. Am I a rider who uses my right rein to pull the face to the right, leading the nose first? Both English and Western riders do this. Or am I a rider who uses the right rein as a boundary to block the head from going left? There is a huge distinction. Blocking energy, like a wall, is something the head bumps into. Pulling energy causes head movement. Blocking energy inhibits head movement. So this is where these classical principles that go way back of, quote, keeping the horse between the legs and reins to channel that energy so that we're riding horses where they're moving through their bodies with necks and heads in the center of their body, not a body going one way while hands are pulling the head back and forth. So these seemingly simple concepts, they're happening all the time. They're happening everywhere. A little anecdote, we had this talk, a few of us, Pebbles and Marcy and Catherine and I, before we got started here, and talking about horse well-being and how far it's come. Here's a little anecdote. This was just before COVID, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I was invited to present at a big horse expo in the Netherlands. Lots of people, like an equine affair in the States. Excuse me. And I was part of a panel of 5 of us who were there, 5 presenters who were there. This panel had myself, it had Monty Roberts, it had 2 members of the Dutch gold-winning Olympic dressage team, the Bartel mother and the Bartel daughter. And it had a top natural horsemanship trainer from the Netherlands, a gentleman by the name of Emil Wust. And we were on a panel together, and the discussion in front of the audience, good-sized audience, was horse well-being. And the moderator, before we took questions from the audience, asked the panel, can you all please just say a few words what you think about well-being, the horse's well-being? And I'm not saying what I'm about to say to find any fault with my colleagues. I'm not. But I was the last to speak, and all 4 of my colleagues at the table were addressing physical well-being. They were talking about how far we've come with saddle fit and dental and farrier work and nutrition. It was all about the body. And when it got to me, I said, well, that's great. I agree with everything that my colleagues just said. I would just like to add to it the mental health of horses, because that's not being addressed. And if we're going to talk about the well-being of horses, here is what I would bring to this conversation. I'm at this expo in one of the top equestrian countries in the world. And this is happening in a tent, a great big, huge tent with about 400 or 500 people in it. And I said, every one of us knows when we get up from this talk and we walk out of this tent and we go back out to the show, we are going to see horses performing with flattened ears, flat back in anger. We are going to see horses performing, wringing their tails in anguish. We are going to see horses performing with their tails tucked up tight. We are going to see horses being ridden with hollowed backs, and we are going to see horses ridden behind the vertical. And every one of those physical signals is indicating mental stress. So my question is, when are we going to get past patting ourselves on the back about how we take care of the body? And when are we going to start addressing the minds? And that's where I like to stay focused. Going full circle back to frame of body is frame of mind. Physiotherapy for horses is psychotherapy for horses. And that's where I stay focused. Any questions so far? Comments, criticisms, challenges?
Questions in the chat. I just love everything you're saying. And I just like, when you gave the surgeon as an example, and all of your examples are really moving from do no harm to do the most good.
Yes.
And, from the five freedoms of, freedom from pain, freedom from hunger, freedom from, all of these negatives, to 5 domains of how do we provide the best environment and the best setting for horses. And I love that. And the only comment I see is fascinating.
Thank you.
So,
well, then I'll keep going, because if you don't
Sure.
mind, I'm a bit disruptive about this, especially on social media. I
good.
just had one today that I commented on. Someone posted a video on social media and very righteous about, look at how beautiful it is that this horse is doing a jumping round bridleless. And again, I have nothing going against someone riding bridleless, bitless or bridleless. But the horse had this hugely hollow back the entire time it was jumping. So my comment was, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on right now about the fact that this horse was ridden without a bridle. Why can't you see the hollow back? Just because it's not wearing a bridle doesn't mean it's not stressed. It is so stressed. So, they have this great saying, the Dutch, and I researched the saying. It turns out it actually comes from the Bible. But this quote is, in the land of the blind, the man with one eye is king. In the land of the blind, the man with one eye is king. So yeah, we can do this and look at the horse world and go, oh, that's beautiful. Look at that lovely autistic child on that horse getting a beautiful session at a therapeutic center. And then we go, oh, too bad the horse is miserable about it.
And Chris, we have a comment. Louise is saying, a challenge at the therapeutic riding center I work at is that we have so many different people handling the horses, volunteers, etc. We need everyone to learn this.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And if we get very real about this, in terms of process to achieving that, there's a very big therapeutic riding center there in the US. I'm not going to name names because I like them and they have great intentions. Huge organization, multi-million-dollar a year organization with a couple of hundred volunteers. And they asked me to come in and help them with some problem horses. I met them at the PATH conference years ago. So all good intentions. And here's what happens though, when I get down there, and I went 2 or 3 times a year for 2 or 3 years in a row. They get caught up in the political correctness that while Chris is here, we want him to work with as many of our volunteers as possible. And the thinking was the more people that could learn from Chris, the better. And I said to them, that's not going to work. But they didn't want to hear that. I said, you would be much better off giving me a smaller number of people that I can do more work with to actually reach a critical mass of competency while I'm here. And then they train your trainers like it. But they water it down by having too many. To coach 16 people for 20 minutes each is not the same as coaching 6 people all day long. It just isn't. So again, it doesn't add up to any real competency that raises the whole standard of well-being for the horses. On the other hand, there's another place that Catherine introduced me to. It's a PATH center. It's Ray of Light Farm in East Haddam, Connecticut. Same thing. I go in there to work with the problem horses, the biters and the kickers, and they turn around beautifully. this is a great story from Bonnie, their executive director. She shared this with me last year that I think they have about 50 something horses on the property. This is an animal rescue center for all creatures, not just horses. And the veterinarian was out doing deworming in the spring of all these horses. And at the end of the day, he said, wow, they were all so well behaved. Where do you get such good horses? And Bonnie smiled and said, we don't get them, we train them. When I was last spoke at a PATH regional conference down in the States a couple of years ago, PATH Region 2, the president of, I don't know if she's the president or the CEO, Kathy Alm mentioned in her talk that the number one challenge PATH is having, and I remember this, it's etched into my memory, finding and maintaining suitable horses. And that's true. So good luck finding and you have to develop them. You have to take what you can get and have the competent people that can work with the horses to reach a critical mass of wellness in those. And it is possible that a horse, one of my favorite sayings is to err is human, to forgive is equine. You can take what is the angriest horse out there, and it can change. It can, in a very short period of time, not only be kinder, but angry horses turn around and show genuine appreciation when we change. And a horse can reach a critical mass of there's enough people around me that are user-friendly enough that I'm spending less time stressed and more time okay. And because I spend more time okay, when I do run into that human who's sending me mixed signals, I'm not as reactive because I'm not stressed. I'm a little more forgiving with them. So at Ray of Light Farm for the last few years, seriously, this sounds like I'm blowing smoke, but we have physically rehabilitated a lot of broken down horses that are now going quite well. And we have psychologically been able to help a lot of shut down, angry horses and frightened horses who'd had enough of human beings, and now they're happy campers. And the distinction with Ray of Light is that they have reached a critical mass of in-house trainers. So they have a team now that is aware enough that it is reflecting in all of the horses, that just the whole herd is mentally and physically better off than they were, say, 5 years ago.
So
So
Chris,
that's
sorry, I just had a comment and then there's a question in the chat. And I just wanted to add that one of our board members, who I don't think is on now, she's on our Equine Wellbeing Committee, has a program for at-risk youth. They are a rescue and a sanctuary. They only have rescued horses that basically were thrown away or seized by the sheriff. All of their horses are happy, they're healthy, and they compete. And they took championship in Pony Club Nationals, the
that's
team
great.
of at-risk youth with rescued horses. And right on
Where's this?
topic, that's in Forest, Virginia. It's Brook Hill Farm.
That's
And it's
great.
Joanne Miller's program. And I am sure if you ever wanted more information, she'd love to talk to you or have
Yeah.
you visit. So
That's
that would be
that's
wonderful.
the exception, Marcy. That's it. So
Yeah,
kudos to
it's
her.
We know that.
It's
Yeah.
phenomenal. So the question, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, Eleni K, is saying in therapeutic programs, especially small operations where horses are continuously in work and being handled by so many people, how do you combat equine burnout? You touched on it, but maybe you have more to add.
Educate the people. It does take educating the people, and it takes, as I was just talking about the Ray of Light model, it is not realistic, for instance, that I travel to a place, spend 2 or 3 days in a clinic with a bunch of volunteers and expect any of them to reach a level of, new understanding that leads to a paradigm shift in the horses. It's not that quick and it's not that easy. It just isn't. However, any organization, no matter how busy you are, no matter how many people you have, there are a couple of real critical issues that can be addressed that make a big difference. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it can be the shift out of a dysfunctional herd into a more functional herd. And those two concepts, if I were to really weed it down to two things. One, it is human beings becoming aware of their chi, the energy that comes out of our solar plexus. There's so much talk about energy, Marcy, but people aren't aware of their energy. They're talking about energy. Well, this is all over the place sending energy. So one is and it doesn't require that people slow down. It requires that people become more aware of how they move their bodies, how they're standing, how they're aligning. Catherine has seen this demonstration. Watch the difference in horses when, let's say you're all watching, you're the horse's face. I'm coming into you. Now, as I come in to pet you, I'm coming to pet the horse. Very few people will do what I'm about to do. Right there, looking at my camera lens, if that's the face of the horse, to come in, arcing to his side, pulling the nearest shoulder away, the nearest tip away, and reaching in to pet you with what is my outer arm. People don't. People come right in and pet with the inner arm. So petting horses like this, as opposed to like that, can be the difference between a horse who bites you or not. And if you've had 20 people today come in and do this, by the middle of the afternoon, you're fed up and you're biting them as they walk up. You're threatening. That one issue right there. For the horse people listening, we talk about a horse being on the correct lead at the canter. We talk about a rider being on the correct diagonal at the trot. There is a correct leg to stand on and a correct arm to pet with, so that the energy around the neck and the head is a drawing energy. It's energy moving away from the face as I come in to pet you, not pushing energy as I come in to pet you. That one thing is a huge game changer for a lot of horses. So becoming more aware of how we move around their neck and head is one thing. The second thing goes back to what I was saying with contact, to understand using contact only as boundaries of where you don't want horses to go, not pulling energy, pulling them where you want them to go. If you're leading a horse, if you're the horse and I'm on your left side, that I don't just mindlessly take a rope in my right hand and pull your head to go. That I would open my hip as a draw and reach back with the rope or even a little dressage whip and drive the back to go, not pull the front to go. To not pull a horse's head to the right to turn it right. If you want a horse to go to the right and you're on the ground, don't pull its head right. Push its hips out to the left. Steer the back end by driving it out of turns. Don't pull the front end into turns. Those two things right there, not pulling heads into turns, not pulling heads forward, these three things, not pulling heads into turns, not pulling heads forward, and being aware of how we're using our torso and our arms when we're around the neck and head. Those simple little concepts like that, I can teach those to an 8-year-old child in 20 minutes. The problem, here is the challenge. It's the mindfulness of the human being. That we're so stressed, even the ones who are pretending they're not, that we lose awareness for what we're doing in the moment. We are not self-aware and paying attention to how we bring these three energies, pushing, blocking, and drawing, to the horse. So one that people laugh about And we've all seen it. It's like a caricature. The little, Aunt Mabel sees her little nephew Bobby and goes up to Bobby and grabs his cheeks and tells Bobby how much she loves him. And Bobby just hates it, but she loves him, and he's not loving the loving. That's happening with horses. An example I use all the time that people can relate to: watch a child loving a kitten. Intentions are great, but it's the physicality of how the child is using their body. The kitten's not loving the loving. And the kitten will scratch the child, sometimes bite the child, and now the child's in tears and drops the kitty and says it's a bad kitty. That's not a bad kitty. That is a child unaware of how his or her body is affecting the kitten. Same thing goes for humans and horses. And it can be an adult, well-intentioned volunteer who's upset because that Norwegian fjord just bit her. And she loves that Norwegian fjord. Why would he bite me? I love him. Yeah, but he doesn't love how you love him. If you pet him with the other arm, if you pet him here instead of there, he'd love you even more. So it can be that simple, but it's the most challenging thing there is to keep human beings grounded in the moment with what they're doing. Really, just to be self-aware. Okay, I've only got 3 energies that come out of my body. This is another one that I can say this statement and it sounds oversimple, but there's only 3 energies that we're ever working with: pushing, blocking, and drawing. Those are the only 3 physical energies there are. Right now, gravity has everybody pushing into a chair. The chair's not pushing you back. It's blocking you. It's not pushing you.
So Chris,
So it can be that simple. Can we keep track of how we push, block, draw with our body? Yes.
here's another question in the chat, and Christina is asking your thoughts and opinions on using treats as part of training and horse interaction.
I'm not against it. I'm a little on the fence about it. Treats theoretically are a great thing if they're congruent with what the body is saying. But if the body is saying one thing and the horse is seeing through routine that, well, it's not about your body, it's about that treat, then the horse is being taught ignore the energy of the body and perform for the treat. And what I've seen happen, this is going to sound righteous, and it's not intended to sound righteous, but using treats to train horses to do what I would essentially call circus tricks, those horses will not go through truly stressful and fearful situations just to get a treat. So keep me in a comfort zone, I'll perform circus tricks for treats. Take me out of the comfort zone, and we don't have a relationship based on anything other than the fact that you feed me. So what I'm getting at here, and this is what I started this conversation with, to connect these dots: A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. To say that horses speak a nonverbal language, it's called body language, then we need to learn that because that's their paradigm. That's how they communicate. To negate that and substitute my self-awareness for my biomechanics for treats, again, this sounds righteous or harsh, but I could say sometimes I just look at that as simple-minded. That is like the parent who says, I'll just give my kid a cookie rather than be a parent. I'm going to give my kid a cookie and put them down in front of a video rather than engage. So I'm not against treats. I'll give my horse treats, but I think the treats need to be the icing on the cake, and the cake is a relationship based on mutual understanding of what our bodies are saying to each other. So go back to, so often it's been called a dance. The relationship between the body of the human and the body of the horse is a dance. So it's time to tango, but I don't know how to tango. Will you tango with me for a treat? But I don't know how to tango. I don't know how to lead the tango, but I want you to tango for a cookie. I'm not against them, but I don't believe for a minute that it actually leads to a profound relationship based in understanding of respect and trust. It's not what a lot of people want to hear, but the pendulum has swung from, this is not what people want to hear. The pendulum has swung from toxic masculinity. Let's beat horses into submission. And I don't want to sound offensive, but it has swung in many ways to the opposite spectrum. Let's just feed them so they love us. When you look at the true nature of a horse, food has nothing to do with relationships in nature. It has nothing to do with relationships. It does with predators, and the clicker training and the food training started with predators, with everything from killer whales and dolphins to parrots. Those are predators. If I'm a horse and you're all a herd of horses, and someone just brought me home, someone bought me, rescued me from an auction and brought me home and tossed me out in your herd. If your herd decides that you don't want me in, and this can happen, that doesn't mean I don't get to eat. I can be ostracized. I can be kept out of the herd. I always have to stay a little off to the perimeter of the herd, but the grass is on the ground. I get to eat. Dogs very much relate food to hierarchy, performance, and a reward. Horses don't. Horses, when you put a bucket of grain down on the ground, they will fight over the grain, but it has to do with you're invading that space around my neck and head. So they're only, shall I say, territorial about food when it comes to within their bubble. So horses don't necessarily relate naturally to food as a relationship builder. That's not how they have relationships with each other. Food has absolutely nothing to do with defining leadership within a herd. Push, block, draw, the mechanics of the body do. And when I say push, block, draw of the body, keep this in mind, please. We're talking about a prey animal. It's a herd animal. Everything that I'm talking about here is being a shepherd. So imagine you're a high-strung sheep, you're a horse, you're a member of a herd. Just because someone feeds you treats does not mean that you trust that they have the power to protect you. This is a hard one. This is a really hard one for people to accept. Just because you're nice doesn't mean a horse trusts you either. Because as a prey animal, a horse would need to know that its leader could protect it. A horse does not need to see you wrestle with a mountain lion and win to know that you can protect it. But if a horse knows that it has tested your boundaries and it has found your boundaries, which is blocking energy, that your boundaries can be inconsistent. That's a nice way of putting it. If you have inconsistent boundaries, then a horse can't possibly trust that you would be the shepherd that could protect it. If I can get through your boundaries, then you have nothing that can protect me. That's what I mean by A equals B, B equals C. None of this is at all to justify aggression or abuse. I'm not saying that. But as delicate as this subject is, horses are natural creatures, and in nature, there needs to be a balance between the masculine and the feminine. And that's what's way out of balance. If you just beat them into submission, that is old school toxic masculinity. If it's command and control, do what I say or else, that is old school toxic masculinity. But it's not balanced at all to think that a horse will face its fears because you're nice and you give it cookies. It will face its fear if it knows you are a leader who has demonstrated that it can trust the consistency of a non-threatening strength. an assertive but non-threatening strength. And so if you've got that, if a horse really appreciates who you are for how you are, then the cookies are the icing on the cake, to mix my metaphors. But if a horse is seeing gaps in how your body communicates, then that leaves them feeling vulnerable. That was a long answer to a short question.
So we have a couple more questions, and we also have 8 minutes left. So Eleni K is asking a multi-part question. It's, how do you adjust to working with a para-equestrian? Do you have to? And how much is adaptation versus compromise, and on whose part?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. Who asked that question?
Eleni, if I'm pronouncing it right, and forgive me if I'm not, K. Last name starts with K.
Well, this brings up another topic that we haven't dealt with yet. And there are stages to a horse's development. I'm talking about the ideal situation now. And I define those as training, schooling, and self-carriage. Now, we hear those words a lot, and there ideally is a distinction between training, schooling, and self-carriage. And for this, since we're talking with words and face-to-face, I have to use analogies since we're not doing this with live horses. But the analogy for this is a child learning to ride a bicycle. So we know that a child learning to ride a two-wheel bicycle, a young child has training wheels on the back. And this is a good analogy because the training wheels are not steering the bicycle and they're not propelling it forward. They're just balance. Now, after the child has bumped into those training wheels a number of times and the parent is shepherding and watching, and now I can see that my child's training wheels are no longer bumping into the ground. By the way, those training wheels are blocking energy. That's all they're doing. They're blocking. This is why boundaries are such a beautiful thing. Boundaries have got such a bad rep. Boundaries can be considered as blocking supportive energies to keep you from falling over. So these blocking wheels, training wheels, once the child's not bumping into them anymore, the parent can take them off. The child's got some balance. Now the child is schooling on the bicycle, but still needs handlebars. Maybe a year or two later, the child's going, look, Ma, no hands, riding just from their seat with no hands. That is a child who now has self-carriage on a bicycle. So the training of horses should not, ideally, would not be asked to endure limitations from people during the training phase. The compromise that gets to be made is according to my student, and this could be Paralympic riders. This could be at a therapeutic riding school. But the question would be, is the horse beyond a fundamental training stage? Is it very well balanced with someone in good schooling, or has it even reached a point of self-carriage? When horses know how to carry themselves well, if I take this back to one of the first things I mentioned, if I'm a horse and I have had so much good training and schooling that I've developed a muscle memory all on my own. I don't go around with a hollow back. I go around with a relaxed back. All on my own. I don't lead turns with my face. I lead turns from my inside hip through a bending body to my outside forehand. I am balanced when I turn. If I can take care of myself as a horse, then I can take care of a rider who has some limitations. If I can't take care of myself, then I'm probably not going to get the help that I need or the aids that I need from a rider with limitations. So the key is self-carriage, getting horses to the point where they can provide these services to people.
Love it. There's a comment by LKG initials, says that needing to be aggressive is a weakening of one's boundaries.
Yes. Yes. If you have a this is why I like the topic about boundaries, because so often people have been taught, especially with natural horsemanship, they're defining boundaries as their own bubble, their own bubble. But the horse has a bubble. This is what I'm going back to about its neck and head. The number one boundary that I bring to students is what they don't do to the horse. It's about not pulling on that head, not leading the nose first, being aware of how you pet. Thou shalt not send pushing energy into the neck and head of the horse, because if you do, it causes the nose to move first, and that sends off alarm bells in a horse's physiology. Thou shalt not. So that's a self-imposed boundary. I have a self-imposed boundary. I will not lose my temper on a horse. These are self-imposed boundaries. Going back to that talk about how it's so prevalent in natural horsemanship for the gurus to teach people, you got a bubble and the horse needs to respect your bubble. However, I'm going to stand up again. People tend to stand around. I'll leave it down here by my torso, and we rest on one leg or the other while we're talking. And so just look in here. As I'm standing like this, I've got my weight on this leg. This hip is in a bit of a bow. This is read by a horse as a drawing energy. I'll stand this way to the camera. This is pushing energy into you. This is drawing energy away from you. Drawing is come here. I can't tell you literally how many thousands of times I have seen a human being add all this up, do this to the face of a horse because it invaded their bubble, but it didn't invade their bubble. They invited it in. They just didn't know they invited it in. They did not know that their body sent the signal, come. And the horse took that signal and came, and then they sent pushing energy to the head to cause no first movements. That is happening constantly, constantly. So that's what I mean by these boundaries. It's a wonderful self-imposed boundary that I will not do anything to stress this horse. I will learn how not to stress this horse. And Kathy and a number of the people here have seen this work. Robin knows this work. The first response that I get from people when we do a session together is they had no idea what they were doing. We do not know what we do not know. And the most well-intentioned people out there don't know that they're sending a little bit of push where it needed to be a draw, that they're blocking what needed to be a draw, that they're drawing what needed to be a push. And so we need, first and foremost, self-awareness for what we're bringing to a horse. And I know we're running low on time or out of time.
I was gonna pop in and say that we are. I do know we have to ask Pebbles if we can we carry on?
I just wrap it up with a statement.
Sure. If you have some extra time,
okay.
People want to
if
stay
we can,
on,
then we're good. Because there are a couple more questions. Should I throw them out now?
Let's take just a few more minutes. I would just like to say all of this. I've been doing this for a long time and trying to come up with what is it? And it's only really been in the last couple of years that I've been able to distill it into a few words, what this paradigm shift with people is. It is about us shifting out of unconscious reactions into conscious responses. Our body unconsciously reacts. We don't even know what we're doing, but then we see how the horse responds to what we did, and then we react to the horse. Some of these things I've been talking about, I like to challenge the group with this. Think of how many times you've walked into a barn in your life, more times than you can count, and you see these horses hanging out with their necks and heads at the top of the Dutch door. The bottom door of the stall's closed, the top door of the gate to the stall's open, and there's a horse hanging with its neck and head out, and everybody that walks by, it flattens its ears and it threatens them. We've all seen that, and you see it a lot. And that goes back to that horse has had enough of people sending pushing energy to its neck and head. Just how people walk down that barn aisle. can be registered as offensive to horses. So a moment ago, I made that line, we need to shift out of unconscious reactions into conscious responses. And here's another one. We don't need to desensitize horses. We need to sensitize people. But this goes back to the statement of when needing to be aggressive is a lapse in your boundaries. It's true. Violence is a substitute for knowledge. Knowledge is power. When you know what you're doing, even the most difficult horses are easy. When you don't, they can get difficult. When they get difficult, we can get frustrated or frightened, and then we get angry. So the answer, as cliche as it sounds, is knowledge. The horses don't want to be frightened, and they don't want to be angry. And they will change in real time, right in front of our eyes, as soon as people are clearly communicating with them.
Love it. So, Pebbles, can I throw out another quick question and comment or two?
It's up to Chris.
Chris,
Sure.
are you okay?
Sure.
That would be great. So Christina asks, why do horses paw on cross ties, and how can we help them find confidence / calm?
Great. Cross ties are a big issue. First response to this is cross ties are not a relationship. They're just not a relationship. So ideally, going back to training, schooling, self-carriage, a trainer or handlers of horse would use their bodies to the horse's bodies consistently enough that the horse is calm and regulated, that the horse gets a chance to understand that it can be okay in its own skin when it's around people. If we have not, through our relationship with our bodies to the bodies of the horse, been able to get them to stand still and quiet and relaxed, then don't tie them up. Because tying them up is not a relationship, and we've all seen it, all that happens when they're in the cross ties, and it leads back to what I was saying about neck and head movements. Put horses in cross ties who don't have self-carriage and know how to stand calm and still on their own yet, and they start doing this. They start slashing or slopping around between the cross ties. Well, that is nose first movements. And as the nose first movements happen, the next thing you know, they're hollow backed and nose first movements. And now the body and the mind are so stressed, they can't stand still. It's impossible to stand still, but they're tied. So they're stuck. And that's why they start pawing out of that frustration. It's just not working for them. So don't tie horses in cross ties. When I'm working with young horses or starting horses or dealing with behavioral issues, remedial work on horses, I don't tie them up until I know that that horse, that I've worked with that horse and the push, block, draw alignment out of my body into the alignment of the horse's body. My biomechanics to their biomechanics has facilitated a horse whose chemistry is so calm and relaxed. They look stoned. They look absolutely mesmerized. That's a horse you can tie up. But don't tie up horses who are inverted in their backs and busy in their heads, because it's not helping at all. You also watch how people go under the cross ties. Again, the center, the camera's the horse's head. Here's your head. There's a tie on each side. As people go under cross ties, you don't see them pull their core away from the head going under the cross ties. They tend to turn their head away and throw their hips. They turn their head away and throw the hips and torso towards the neck and head of the horse. So it's the core of the human being pushing that head. And the head gets pushed and then it bumps into the cross tie. So it's just irritating as hell for these horses. So again, it's another example of how you go under the cross ties, how you pet a horse, how you put a halter on, how you lead a horse.
Thank you. And then Eleni K is making the comment, horses play the game of who can move whose feet first.
Yes, they do. They play the game of who can move whose feet first. That's true. However, taking that back a step, That is often translated or interpreted by people as, well, you need to get them to move their feet before they move your feet. But a big challenge that comes up from a lot of horses is, who are you to think you can move my feet? And they challenge the fact that you want to move their feet. So when we hear statements, here's another one. Earlier, I was talking about training, schooling, and self-carriage. It needs to be much deeper than all of this. The question has not been asked, are you a total stranger to this horse? Is this your very first time meeting a horse? If it's the first time meeting a horse, that horse is not going to assume that just because you're a human being who walks in on two legs and you tell it to move its feet, that it should move its feet. I know if I'm a horse and a total stranger walks up to me and says, move your feet, it's like, pardon me, who the fuck are you to tell me to move my feet? That's what you're going to get. So then it becomes this, pardon my cursing, but I did that just to emphasize my point. When a trainer says, we need to move their feet, there's a specific trainer who you've all heard of who said that the most, and it became a meme. And I heard him one time say that to a student, and the student said, how do you want me to move their feet? Good question. And he said, I don't care how you move the feet, just get the feet moving. So to say, I don't care how you get them to move their feet, just get their move. If the front end moves first, that's for fight or flight. So if my movements cause a horse's front feet to engage before its back feet engages, that horse will relate my demand for movement as threatening. It's not shepherding back to front, it's threatening front to back. I have a completely different approach to this, and Catherine has seen this. I have an exercise that I do with new students, first time I work with them, and it's their own horse. And it's this: can you stand beside your horse and neither one of you move your feet? Can you stand beside your horse and facilitate absolute calm, focused stillness? Anyone can make a horse move their feet. Can you put your horse to sleep? And I don't mean euthanize it. I mean, when you stand next to it, does it feel so calm and confident and respectful and trusting and appreciative of how you are, that in your presence, it lets its guard down and just anyone can make them move their feet? Do you know how to stand next to a horse, respect the no push zone around its neck and head, and consciously respond to the little challenges it will bring you with your push block draw so effectively, so in the moment, on such a profoundly subtle level that the horse knows what you know and knows mutual respect, mutual trust, I can be at peace with this person. Then when you ask that horse to move its feet, no problem. So before I ask a horse to move its feet, I want to show it I'm a force to be reckoned with, nothing to be afraid of. I'm not here necessarily to move your feet. I'm here to show you you can respect and trust how I am when I'm in your space, because we're the ones that walked into their space. They didn't, the human walks up to the horse and said, I'm imposing my agenda on you. It's not that they come and impose their agenda on us. So yeah, I start with that mutual respect. Now, of course, when you stand beside a horse and ask it to stand perfectly still and it doesn't, you do end up moving its feet. That engages the process. But the horse knows you chose to move its feet, and you chose to move its feet from back to front as a pushing response to it just challenging you, which takes us full circle back to the boundaries.
Chris, that was so wonderful. We do have more questions, but I think we need to wrap it up. So we just appreciate you so much. We learned so much. Comments are coming in, eye-opening. Thank you. Someone's trying it out with their horse at this moment. I don't know if we want to have a way to address questions after the fact, but I think we need to end this. And we're getting lots of thank yous and how wonderful it was.
So
Well,
I was going to, Chris's website is wonderful, and anybody could go there, I'm sure, to reach out. And I did want to, Chris, I wanted to thank you and tell you that the using the concepts of push, block, and draw is something that I use every single time I work with the horses. And what you were just talking about, and you've used a term, emotional authority, that again, that it struck a chord with me. And again, it's something that I think of in every horse that I work with. So thank you so much for all that you've done and all that you share.
Thanks back to you, Catherine. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just for everyone, you know, on a closing note, if I were to come up with one word that defines everything that we would want to achieve with a horse, it would be balance. Physical balance, mental balance, emotional balance, balance. I've got one more. You know, and that's the balance between predator and prey. That's the balance between we want them to serve us and we need to serve them. That's the balance between the masculine and the feminine and how we're responding to things. It's balance. But to close it up, I'd like to share this with you. I like to ask people, what is it that we're asking of horses? What are we asking of them? When I ask that question, I get responses like respect, trust, cooperation, control, willingness. Yeah. Okay. Those are all legitimate, shall I say, leadership tools, emotional authority tools towards an end of us leading them. But what are we asking of them? And that's a tough question. And here's the hint that I bring to people. When you put a horse in the horse trailer to go somewhere, you know where you're going and the horse doesn't. That when you go for a trail ride, you might know where you're going, but maybe the horse doesn't. Someone comes to a clinic and I say, can I take your horse and show you something with it? The horse has never met me before. That horse had no idea today that its owner was going to hand it over to a total stranger. So the message is, whatever we're doing with horses, what we're ultimately asking of them, we want them to allow us to lead their vulnerability into the unknown. That's a tall ask. We ask them to allow us to lead their vulnerability into the unknown. And I like to wrap it up with this because everyone knows it's a cliche statement. Leaders ideally would lead by example. So I always ask horse people, are you practicing your own ability to embrace the vulnerability? Are you practicing that? Are we as horse people putting into practice our ability to manage our stress and manage our vulnerability as we go forward into the unknown? And ultimately, that's what I think the work with the horses is all about. That if we can shift out of unconscious reactivity into conscious responses, if we have the accountability to turn up our awareness and lead by example, then we are practicing our ability to go forward and embrace the vulnerability of going into the unknown.
I would encourage anyone and everyone who's interested to go to Chris's website, and it's chrisirwin.com, right?
Yeah, if you're on Facebook, I'm much more
Active
reachable
there.
on Facebook.
Okay, great.
Find seems like a lot of business goes through Facebook and Instagram these days, but
excellent.
Yeah, I'm maxed out. I won't be able to accept a friend request on Facebook, but it doesn't mean you can't message me anyway.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Share your knowledge and expertise on our webinar today. And hopefully we'll do something later.
That'll be lovely.
So.
And if anyone's interested in coming and watching some work or taking a clinic, come check out Ray of Light Farm in East Haddam, Connecticut. I'm there a number of times each season.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
All.